On April 2, 1917, Jeanette Rankin of Montana was sworn in as the first woman elected to the U.S. Congress. To mark the centennial, here's a brief look at her life and career.
The story of women in Congress begins with Jeannette Rankin, who is elected to the House in 1916 from Montana. She's elected to the House 4 years before women had the right to vote nationally. And in a way, she's really a bridge from the suffrage movement to women attaining full political rights. She was active in a national women's suffrage organization. She helped women get the right to vote not only in Montana, but a couple of states west of the Mississippi. And she runs in 1916. She's elected to one of Montana's 2 at-large districts. And part of her platform is that she's a pacifist. Well, she's sworn into the House on April 2nd, 1917. And the House has come into special session, extraordinary session, because the president that night, Woodrow Wilson, delivers a message to Congress asking for a declaration of war against Germany. This is the U.S. entry into World War I. And Rankin, when that vote is held, is one of a group of about 50 members who votes against U.S. intervention in World War I. She served a term in the House. She was on the Women's Suffrage Committee. She was on the Public Lands Committee, which was an important assignment for a woman from Montana, and with so much of the lands being held by the federal government, so it was an important position. She serves only a term in the House, and she tries to run for Senate from Montana. She doesn't get the Republican nomination, but she runs as an independent. It's an uphill battle. She gets about 1/5 of the votes, though. And then she goes back to private life, and she's involved in women's rights issues. She's a driving force behind the Shepherd-Towner Maternity and Infancy Act, which the House eventually passes in 1921. And then she's also involved in international peace organizations. Well, fast forward to 1940, she runs for Congress again, and she runs on a platform to keep the U.S. Out of the war in Europe. And she's faced on December 8th, 1941, with a tremendous vote. This is the day after Pearl Harbor. FDR has come to the House chamber. He's addressed a joint session of Congress.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
The Senate goes back to its chamber and very quickly unanimously passes a war resolution, and the House begins debating, and the House members know that Jeannette Rankin is a pacifist, and she is going to vote her conscience. So we have some oral histories of people who are in the chamber who recall members going up to Rankin and asking her just to vote present, don't vote no. And but she votes her conscience in the end, and she opposes the war. She's the lone vote against U.S. entry into World War II with the declaration of war against Japan. That effectively ended her political career. She goes back into private life, and but she's a force in the anti-war movement really for another couple decades, but a remarkable career.
In 2004, we commissioned a new portrait of Jeannette Rankin. She was a person who's so important in the history and expansion of rights and representation in Congress. So when we commissioned it, we wanted to show what it was like to come into Congress as the first woman, when women don't even have the right to vote nationally. And because it was the 20th century, because it's 1916 and 1917 when she is elected and enters Congress, there's a lot of newspaper coverage of it. And because she's a woman and something of a novelty, there's a lot of newspaper coverage of what she's wearing. So we know exactly what she was wearing. And so the portrait itself shows her in that navy blue dress, and we know she was wearing a big hat. And we know exactly what the Washington Post said that morning. And so the portrait has her in those clothes holding the Washington Post. And one of the things that's most interesting is that she is wearing that hat, and she is placed in that portrait just outside the chamber doors. If we were to enter into that space with her, she would be just about to turn to her right and enter the chamber, at which point she would take off her hat, because hats were not worn in the chamber, even though there was much discussion of, as a woman, should she wear a hat because that's formal attire, or is she not a woman but a member of Congress and therefore shouldn't wear it. And indeed, it turns out they decide she's a member of Congress more than she is her gender millenarily, so she takes it off. And all of those things we wanted to put in that portrait, as well as a real sort of sense of the fact that she was in the House, but much more a creature of her other interests as well: pacifism, suffrage, all of the issues that were important to her. And so it was a somewhat lonely spot to be in, to be the only woman, and also to be taking these stands of conscience that put her very much at odds with other people.